Hey there, I'm Brad Andrus, downtown Denton, Texas. We are excited to talk today about the restoration of the Fine Arts Theater and all of the challenges, ups and downs, and just the excitement that's surrounding that project and the ways that that kind of impacts our communities and projects like it do. So excited to talk about it today.
Welcome to the Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast, brought to you by the Rental Property Owners Association, where real estate investors have found success since 1968. I'm your host, Brian Hamrick from Hamrick Investment Group. This episode is sponsored by Green Property Management, managing everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area. Find out more at greenpropertymgt.com. And RCB and Associates, helping real estate investors and small business owners navigate the complex world of health insurance and Medicare benefits at rcbassociatesllc.com. Hello and welcome to episode 512. For real estate investors who appreciate the craftsmanship and character of historic buildings, there's nothing more rewarding than a true restoration. Today's guest, Brad Andrus, is bringing that vision to life with the revival of a fine arts theater in Denton, Texas. A long forgotten landmark he's transforming into a vibrant, income-producing community space. We'll talk about what it really takes to bring a historic building back online, the challenges behind the walls, and the legacy-minded strategy that makes it all worth it. Brad, welcome to the show.
Thanks a lot. Glad to be here. Appreciate you having me on.
How long you've been investing in real estate and how you ended up being part of this historic theater restoration?
I've been in commercial real estate full-time now for right at 10 years. Started transition from commercial banking. I worked for a community bank here in the Denton area. And did a lot of real estate lending primarily in that role. Did that for almost 10 years at two different banks. And that background and experience kind of got me hooked on commercial real estate. For probably 25 years now, I've been investing in real estate, but had been really started out in the residential side of things, kind of duplexes, single family rentals, that sort of thing. And so, but as I was getting more accustomed to and familiar with commercial real estate through my banking experience, kind of thought that seems a little more interesting to me. So kind of started making that transition, left banking altogether, like I said, about 10 years ago to join a local small brokerage company, Axis Realty Group, and really kind of was the one and only agent outside of the broker in that firm as we got started. We've got 5 agents now, still prefer to kind of keep it a fairly small shop. But during that time, we started property management and then doing more of our own development and investments in commercial real estate. So I guess it was 2018, we were actually hired to sell the Fine Arts Theater. It's a historic theater there on here on the square in downtown Denton. It was a really exciting assignment to take on because it's an iconic building in Denton. If you Google Denton, Texas, it's very likely, in the images that would come up to see a picture of the Fine Arts. The facade is an iconic kind of facade here in downtown Denton or in the Denton area. And so it was an exciting assignment. And as we took that out to market and talked to numerous groups, the community really was begging for this thing needs to be restored. But it needed a lot of work. There had been a fire in the 80s and the roof was shot. And so there was if it was raining outside, it was raining inside. And so the building was in rough shape. And so, but as we showed it to people, that kind of continue to come back up. The people wanted to restore it, or the community did. The city was very interested in seeing that happen. And so we can talk more about how we transitioned from broker to buyer, but that's where it all got started.
I'd love to know a little bit of history about this theater. Like, when was it built? Was it one of those big palatial type movie theaters that they built back in the 20s and 30s? Or tell us about the building itself. So
it was originally built, right at the turn of the century, and it was a funeral and undertaker shop. So, they were doing, they kind of had a general store going on, but they did a lot of, coffins and undertaking work and funeral work. And so that's what was going on in the building up until about the 30s. And it was converted at that time into the Texas Theater, originally called the Texas Theater. And Texas Theater was kind of a chain, sort of independently operated chain of theaters across, of course, Texas. And the most famous of which is in Dallas, in the Oak Cliff area, which is where it's infamous for being where Oswald was captured after the assassination. And so that it had that same ties. Of course, by the time that happened, it had already been changed to the Fine Arts Theater, but it was part of that chain originally. And yes, like you said, those old historic theaters in this particular section of downtown was kind of theater row for Denton. There was 3 of them pretty much right in a row, and they were all, of course, single screen theaters back in the day. And so one might be showing this and the others would be showing other shows. And so they were competing, but they were also, just a variety of options for people to, for entertainment options in those days. And so it was converted to the Fine Arts Theater in the 50s, late 50s. And so rebranded as the Fine Arts Theater, kind of got a new facade, new makeover there. And so the facade that's on there now is really that same, more or less that same facade. And so anybody that's still, by and large, that's still around that ever attended that theater as a kid, knows it as the Fine Arts Theater. And so my mom included, she's nearly 80, and she just talks about all the memories she has going into the Fine Arts Theater and watching movies. And so, yeah, it was still a single screen, really large room, about 200 seats on the ground floor, and then had a balcony that sat about 70 or 80 people in that balcony mezzanine area that kind of overlooked that main screen. So operated that way until the early 80s, like a lot of towns across America, the malls started popping up, and we got a mall in Denton. And so there was a new theater, multi-screen theater that was built kind of on the outside of the downtown core. And that was, the new shiny thing everybody wanted to go to. So the Fine Arts Theater kind of rebranded as a second run kind of dollar movie, dollar theater. But it really didn't operate that way very long because, like I mentioned, a couple of years into that, it had this fire in the mezzanine. The most of the building was still in good shape, structurally speaking, but that mezzanine area was unusable. But it really just kind of became the real beginning of the end for anything that was in any way operated as a theater there.
That's really interesting. It's kind of a history lesson there, because I think the history of your theater is kind of the history of a lot of theaters around the country. The same dynamics, the malls in the 80s, putting these single purpose theaters, kind of making them change their business model to the second run thing. But it's interesting that the building itself was an adaptive reuse from, like you said, an undertaker's business to a theater. I mean, first of all, is there still evidence of that? And then the second question, of course, is the building haunted? I
haven't experienced any hauntings myself or anything that gives me any reason to believe that. There's not been any stories of that in the community. So I don't think so. We're not hearing any of that. I really get a kick out of that because our office building that just is about, 3-4 blocks from the downtown area. We just walk up to downtown all the time. But our office building was actually originally built as a hospital. And so we do have a lot of stories from that building of some hauntings. I can't say that I've experienced it, but I know a lot of people that say there's something going on in this building. And so anyway, but no, not at the Fine Arts. The only evidence that we really have today of that original use. So the building, the 4 walls, brick walls, are still in place, and more or less the roof that was there when it was built. But you can see kind of holes in the brick. So when they went in and did the theater, of course, they wanted the sloped floor so that you could kind of get that stadium seating to some extent. It wasn't quite as drastic as it might be today, but it does have a sloped floor. Once you kind of get about a third of the way in, it starts sloping back towards the back. Well, they dug that out when they came in to do the Texas Theater in the 30s. They had to dig all that out, and so they removed what was just an old wood floor, basically the wood brace or trusses, I guess, floor trusses that spanned from one side of the brick wall to the other, and you can see the holes where those wood trusses kind of fit into the brick, and that was the flooring system in the day. And so when they removed that flooring, those holes in the brick sides are still there. You could see where those wood trusses would have been, but it's now been dug out. And of course, concrete was poured over top of that. So that's about the only thing that we can, see today that's visible from that era.
So when you were brought on board to help sell this property, was it vacant and just not being used at all? And then what clicked in your head that made you say, oh, well, maybe I should buy this and be the one to restore it?
It was pretty much vacant. There were a few things going on here and there. There had been a church that was using the space for a number of years. There would occasionally be, somebody get excited about doing kind of a live music show or something. And so a couple of those events happened over the years. And there was, we ended up partnering with some guys that I'll talk about in a moment that did really try to do the kind of more or less the concept we're planning on doing probably about 10 years before it went to the market, and had a couple of live shows, live performances, but really couldn't make make a deal with the current owner at that time to use it on a regular basis. And so I have to give the gentleman who bought it, his name is McBride, last name McBride. He's since passed away, but give him a lot of credit because he owns several properties in the downtown area, and he did, as much as the building was deteriorating on the inside, and again, primarily because the roof was just totally rotten, he did maintain that facade. I mean, so many buildings, and you've probably seen this in other historic areas, they in the 70s and the 80s, people had these bright ideas. Let's kind of cover these up. Let's put some mansard roof on it. Or, I mean, most of them are pretty ugly renovations, by today's standards. Certainly the historic preservation kind of movement or thought in these areas wasn't really in place. And so I love to give him credit for maintaining that iconic facade. And so that, if that weren't the case, I don't know that it would have had, as strange as it sounds, we still could have done it and maybe restored it, but I don't know that it would have been top of mind to do that. And so the facade being more or less intact really was a game changer. So as we were talking to folks about this, and I remember one day in particular, I mean, people had a lot of ideas. Like I said, a lot of people wanted to see some sort of restoration of it. But I remember talking to a guy that had come in from Dallas. Not that all Dallas developers are bad, but kind of the big city. He came to Denton, and he was looking around, kind of looking at the building, wanted to see it, and had some ideas. And he kind of looked around the square. He says, what I don't see here in downtown Denton, I don't see any dollar stores. And I'm like, yeah, no, what's your point? Basically, he's like, this could make a really good dollar store. And I was like, what? You can't make this a dollar store? I just couldn't even believe that was being said. And so it was within days of that just stewing in my head and thinking about that. Also, these other guys, Jason and Barack from the Texas Theater in Dallas, they had been touring it, really were interested in doing something, weren't sure how to pull it off financially on the real estate side of things, but had a very strong interest in the project and in operating it kind of off their proof of concept in Dallas. And so all those thoughts were kind of bouncing around in my head. And I finally called, I remember on a Saturday calling my partner, the broker at Axis, but my partner in a lot of real estate things, and just saying, we need to do this. We need to see if, at this point, I think the sellers would be open to a discussion of this. It's pretty unique where the broker is going to end up buying the same property they have listed. That can be a little problematic, those kind of discussions. But based on what was happening, and I knew that the sellers would be interested in seeing something like that happen, we were ready to step up and make it happen. And
were you already familiar enough with the building to know exactly what you were getting into? Or did you kind of have to discover it as you went along?
Very much a discovery, as you go along. And any of these historic kind of renovation projects, of course, in this particular situation, we didn't get a lot of due diligence time on the front end. We had been in the building enough times to have a pretty good handle that it needed to be basically gutted and started over. And so we knew that, but I remember talking to Alex as well as a couple of other partners that ended up putting some money in with us. We paid cash for the property, and I was just really, really, set on that. A lot of times we'll use financing on development opportunities, but this case on the purchase of it, I said, we need to pay cash and we need to have some extra money available to do some demo and to get an architect and some design professionals involved. And so that's basically the money that we pulled together to on the closing, and had some available for these other demo and design fees. And as we got into it, we realized just how extensive this renovation was. And so we started basically we had the architects, and it's a firm called Architects based in Dallas, but they do a lot of historic renovation, preservation work on a lot of the Texas courthouses and the counties throughout Texas, and kind of preserving and restoring them. And so they're very familiar with this kind of work. And the first thing they did is they go through every nook and cranny, detail, design, get it kind of documented on what was there, what it looked like, just millions of pictures, it seemed like. And so before we ever started demoing anything, we had very well documented on what was there, and went and did a lot of historical research on what it looked like before. And so that all started the process of the redesign, and kind of we ended up getting awarded federal and tax historic credits, or historic tax credits. And so that's all important to have it very well documented and be able to demonstrate that we've kind of restored it back to more or less it's this historical accuracy.
I'd like to take a moment to tell you about Green Property Management. Not only do they manage everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area, they also manage my entire portfolio. So I can tell you from personal experience that their unique flat fee management style is worth a closer look. If you feel that your property isn't operating to its fullest potential, then Green Property Management can help you take a holistic approach that will save you money, eliminate your headaches, and increase your net income. And if you're a property manager interested in applying Green Property Management's model, give them a call at 1-866-95-GREEN or visit them on the web at greenpropertymgt.com. If you're thinking of leaving your W-2 job and becoming a full-time real estate investor, one of the greatest costs you must consider is healthcare for you and your family. When I made this transition myself, I found the whole healthcare insurance process to be confusing and frustrating. That's why I'm glad I met Chad Creasy at RCB and Associates. Chad is a professional health insurance agent who helps real estate investors and small business owners understand and choose their best healthcare options. And best of all, his services are covered by the insurance company and won't cost you a dime. If you live in Michigan and are expecting a change in your healthcare insurance coverage for any reason, or losing employer coverage or transitioning into Medicare, then you owe it to yourself to contact Chad Creasy at rcbassociatesllc.com. What kind of budget do you have to do that type of project? And how do the historic tax credits work to help you with that capital stack?
So when on the purchase, we had enough to buy the building, and we had our, a rough idea on design, demo fees and design fees. And so we're talking beyond the purchase of the real estate, about $250,000 there. And so at that point, it was like, okay, let's get it to that stage, figure out what it's really, we'll be able to have a full set of plans, take it out to bid, and see what the project costs. Well, so we bought the building in the fall of 18. It was about the fall of 19 before we kind of had all that together. The other thing we did is we went ahead and put on a brand new roof. We had to change some structural elements to the roof to improve it and better support it, but put a brand new roof in. It got the building stabilized. There's no further deterioration. We had a lot of mold, a lot of asbestos, all of that was abated and remediated. And so through the demo process. But what we found as we went to bid out the project is it was far more expensive really than we ever anticipated to restore it and renovate it. And even more problematic than that, it was more expensive than could be justified in a normal investment deal and what the revenue from that business would generate. Which, by the way, the business plan, and again, this is Jason and Brock, who have operated the Texas Theater for nearly 15 years now. It's what they've been doing. It will be a theater, but it's so much more than that. It's a lot of live performances, live music, live podcasts, comedy shows. Church will be, certainly be in there on Sundays. And basically, they say, hey, anything that somebody could imagine using a space, conferences, anything that somebody could imagine or needing to use a space like that for, they do, and they get those calls. And they do a lot of movies as well. In particular, they'll do a lot of the classic kind of, and they've set theirs up, and ours will be as well, set up with, true 70 millimeter film, reel to reel film, and be able to rent the actual film from the movie studios that they send it from California. You throw the actual film up. And so we'll have digital projectors as well, but it's pretty neat to kind of think about the type of things that will be going on in that space. The mezzanine area that, like I said, had seated 70, 80 people will be closed in. Most of it, about 80% of it will be closed into a second screen. And so you'll be able to go up to that area and there'll actually be a second 50-seat screen up in that area that, we can have two things going on. And that's really important to help improve the economics of it, to be able to do two shows or multiple shows in one evening. And so different sources of revenue there. But the mezzanine will still have kind of on the front 2 or 3 rows that will overlook the main space, kind of give you that feel for being in that old historic area. And so long story short, though, Brian, it at the original bidding, we were probably about a $7.5 million project, which was really going to be hard to overcome. We started having discussions with the city of Denton about participation in it, basically January of 2020. As you can imagine, and those were positive conversations, but as you can imagine, a few months later, it just wasn't the right time as COVID hit. It wasn't the right time to have those discussions. And so for about 2 years, everything just kind of sat still on the project. And as we not revived it, but started focusing on it again and saying, okay, let's get back to work on this and talk to the city again. That construction budget, costs had started really escalating. The inflation, that we were all experiencing was really hitting construction. And so that project ballooned up to about a $10 million project. And I'm talking about every dollar from the dollar we first spent to the purchase to the full opening, including all of the seating and FF&E of the whole theater. We're talking about approximately about a $10 million project. And so in a final, all the dust settles, we start operating this thing. We felt comfortable with about $3 million of debt on it. And so there's a big gap to make up there, right? $7 million gap to make up. Went and had that conversation with the city. The city of Denton was great and jumped in and supported us and doing a grant, a forgivable grant that ensures that the building will be open and operated that way for at least 10 years. That's about $1.7 million. The state and federal tax credits, historic tax credits, those are in place when you do a project like this. And so they're literal, after you finish and you can demonstrate that you did meet their requirements to the restoration, then they basically give you tax credits. And those are tax credits you can use against your personal or business income tax liability. Often developers in these type of projects, and we plan to do this, they'll sell these type of tax credits to other corporations that need them. And, you get 85 to 90 cents on the dollar for whatever that tax. And so that tax credit is, you try and liquidate that to offset some of these costs on the front end. So we'll be able to bring in, we're estimating $3.5 million through the sale of those tax credits. And so between those two things, we were able to shrink that gap substantially and of course, still have a lot of our own cash into it. But that's how all that came together.
Where is it now? Are you up and running? Are you still in the process of rehabbing it? I mean,
yeah.
When can I go there and see a movie? So
we're hoping next June, July. Let's just call it summer of 26. We've got now on the marquee opening 2026 is what we're saying. And so sometime in the summer, we started officially in this spring on the restoration of it. Hired our general contractor to get kicked off on that. They had a 14-month contract in their construction contract. We immediately, is just as soon as you think you've got all the skeletons out of the closet, as it were, in these historic buildings, you find something new. And so we found a couple of new issues right there at the beginning of that, and that kind of delayed us for a few months. But we're underway. We're basically all of our rough plumbing, rough electrical work. We've got new AC units on the roof, but it's still kind of in that kind of rough, plumbing stage in getting those final inspections and then starting to kind of re-pour that foundation and add the new structural steel inside. So we're kind of about that stage, but yeah, next summer.
What are some of the top lessons that you have learned through this process that you would share with anyone else who's considering doing a historical rehab in the same vein of what you're doing?
I would love to say run and don't do it, but I think these kind of projects are so valuable. We typically, again, do a lot of commercial brokerage, but in our development world, we're typically dealing with raw piece of land, and you know more or less what you're dealing with, and you get it fully designed, get all the pieces together. You analyze on the front end with a normal pro forma. We do a lot of self-storage projects, for example, and so it's not a perfect science, but it's pretty dialed in after this many years of people doing these kind of projects. What the pro forma will look like, what your costs are going to look like, and so you only go into it. Lenders, if you're going to go do some financing on it, lenders require certain debt service coverage ratios and all those kinds of things. So it's pretty well spelled out what's going to work and what's not before you get too far into it. In a project like these, you can spend thousands, tens, hundreds of thousands in some cases before you really even get to the point of really understanding what the costs are. And so that's challenging. And so it definitely takes, it takes a real strong spirit of community and desire to kind of help build that fabric of the community. What I love about, and this happens to be Denton, Texas, but it goes on across our country in all towns. But what we have really right here is a mixed use development that was just done and built up organically over a century plus, of housing, retail, office. There used to be kind of industrial uses that are now adaptive reuses of, and coffee shops and those kinds of things, or a brewery. And so those kind of uses kind of take some of those industrial spaces. But, you've got really, really a cool mixed use development that was built up over many, many years. And I think in a lot of these downtown areas like this, one thing they're missing is kind of that anchor tenant. Sometimes it's the government itself, maybe the city or the county is kind of the anchor tenant that will bring people in to do business or to do things. In our case, that's kind of, while our courthouse, and it's beautiful and it's iconic in itself, it's not used in that way anymore. And so, really the downtown area, it's got a lot of good retail, but it needs kind of that anchor tenant that's going to be a draw for the restaurants and the bars and the retailers and the offices that people that are going to bring people in. And so we feel like the Fine Arts Theater is going to be that kind of project. But it takes, and I'm not trying to pat myself on the back by any means, but it takes a lot of vision and commitment to make a project like this work, because they're costly and they're time consuming. And frankly, this is kind of the first project I've been involved in where we're setting it up. Technically, it's a for-profit, but I don't know that we'll ever make a profit kind of project. And so, you really need to be community minded and understand kind of the impacts of that. And then I would say get lots of people involved. We've been very fortunate to get a lot of community support, the city itself, but also a lot of other, those in the arts and in the film industry and those kinds of things. Get as many people involved in whatever type of restoration you're doing. That there's plenty of people interested, and so get a big group, a network of support, and they'll help you in a lot of ways.
How would people find out more about you or get a hold of you? And then feel free to plug whatever you'd like to plug.
The best way to reach and connect with me is on LinkedIn. So just Brad Andrus on LinkedIn, and you'll be able to get kind of connected to my website there through that, or schedule a time for a call with me. But LinkedIn's the best way to get connected with me.
How are you using AI in your business today?
We're trying every way we can. We're experimenting with different things. Of course, the normal, just what I'd say now is the normal of just helping review contracts, leases, just any kind of documents, trying to throw as much information at it as possible, using it kind of as a repository of some of our data to make more informed and better decisions. But really just any way we can try and be more efficient by using it is the main thing. And that sounds pretty broad and general, but I tell people all the time, if you're not using one of the LLMs, ChatGPT or Grok or Claude or whatever, just get started and just kind of just start dabbling around with it, it'll change your life pretty quickly. Now we can talk about all maybe the scary downsides of it, but for those of us in business who are looking to be more efficient, more productive, I find a lot of value in it. And so we do have, I guess that's the other thing I could plug, Brian, is we do have a podcast where we talk about that and how we can kind of use real tools in our businesses, not these major things that are hard and too complicated. We're not techies, but we're using it in ways to kind of drive value to our businesses. That podcast is called Weeks Ahead AI. And so you can find that on all the streaming platforms. We just kind of released that a couple of weeks ago. So a weekly podcast on that, just talking about how we use it and maybe some ideas on how people can use it. But we're very much looking to collaborate with others on that front.
I was excited to have you on the show to talk about the historic restoration of your theater in Texas, in Denton, Texas. And boy, did you deliver. You shared a lot of great information, and I appreciate your insight and you being willing to share all the ups and downs of that process. And I've really enjoyed this conversation. So thanks so much for being here today.
Likewise. Thanks for having me on, Brian.
I want to thank everybody for listening to this episode. I'm your host, Brian Hamrick from Hamrick Investment Group, and you can find out more about me by going to higinvestor.com. That's higinvestor.com. This episode was sponsored by Green Property Management, managing everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area. Find out more at greenpropertymgt.com. And RCB and Associates, helping real estate investors and small business owners navigate the complex world of health insurance and Medicare benefits at rcbassociatesllc.com.
You've been listening to the Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast, brought to you by the Rental Property Owner Association. You can find out more at rpoaonline.org. If you enjoyed this podcast, please go to iTunes to subscribe, rate, and review.